Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining. I'm excited to have everybody here for this interesting conversation that we're going to have about traditional publishing in 2026 and what we can expect from it, who is a good fit in terms of an author in a book, and, what.
Oh!
Okay,
Gonna
could
go ahead and mute that
every.
person for now.
Okay, can we just everybody mute themselves? Thank you. Um, So thank you everybody for joining. I'm going to turn on my presentation mode and let's see. Okay, James, can you see those slides?
Yes, we're looking good.
Okay, perfect. So my name is Linda Secondari and I am a creative director and a book strategist. I'm the founder of Studio Lo Secondari, and we are a creative agency, and we work with authors and publishers to develop books and take them to market. And I'm also the creator of the Strategic Author, which is a publishing strategy coaching program. I have 25 plus years of experience as a creative director working in house at most recently at Columbia University Press, where I managed a large international team and we produced thousands of books every year. Um, so I've spent my career kind of coordinating publishing strategy between authors, editors, publishers, marketing staff, and my own creative department, where we were tasked with packaging these books so that the market would be excited by them, would understand what the book was about, but also books that were signaling to audiences, this is content for you. And it's that experience that I had that has provided the framework for this conversation. And, I'm going to do some presenting with slides, but I really would love this to be a conversation. So if you would, like to make use of the chat, I have James with me, and James can let me know if there's any information happening in the chat that might be useful. I'm happy to interrupt what I'm doing to talk. And at the end of this, we'll have some time for questions and answer, and just a discussion of everything that we've been talking about. So let's get to it. Traditional publishing, what it can and what it can't do for you. So, traditional publishing has changed an enormous amount in the, nearly 30 years that I've been working in publishing. And a lot of that has to do with changes in the market and the changes actually in the way books are manufactured. When I first started in publishing, books were traditionally printed on offset printing equipment. And, if you turned on those printers before you could blink, you had printed 500 books. They were just very fast. They were made for high volume. And so publishers, when they wanted to put a book in print, a minimum print run was maybe 1,000 books or 1,500 books. Nowadays, we have technology called print on demand, and it is what fuels a lot of Amazon book purchases, as well as, barnesandnoble.com, most of those digital retail sites. And traditional publishers make use of print on demand also, and it's exactly what it sounds like. You can print on demand, you can print one book. And that has allowed the market to be spread wide, and independent authors can put their books out in the same marketplace that traditionally published authors can. And, from the buyer's perspective, doing research on Amazon or any of the other retail sites, you may not necessarily know the difference between an indie book and a traditionally published book. And the evidence of that is that a lot of these titles have actually done very well in the marketplace, some so well that traditional publishers have uh, purchased the rights to republish those books. In other instances, indie authors don't want that, but the the reason I'm even saying any of this is that this impacts the role of the publisher. So the role of the publisher used to be a gatekeeper of everything, of the manufacturing, of the production, of the sales, of all of those things. But so many of those tools that publishers had that nobody else had access to just because of the volume and the expense. Now those tools are in everybody's hands. So in some ways, the playing field has been leveled. But publishers still, even though they don't have the market exclusively on manufacturing, they still have benefits of their volume, the history of how long they've been publishing books, the expertise of publishing a variety of books. And that's where they stand head and shoulders above anyone who would try to do it on their own. And so traditional publishers, they, offer editorial support, production support, and distribution. Distribution is getting those books published and getting them sent out where they need to go because they've either been sold or they're going to be sold. That means getting them into bookstores, getting them into libraries, potentially for nonfiction and some fiction, having them adopted for course syllabi so that every semester a professor's students are, being asked to purchase X number of books so that they can then read them while they're taking the course. Having access to the promotion through, media and publicity and trade reviews. Also being able to assist an author in negotiating rights, a Netflix series or translation rights into foreign languages, various kinds of audio rights or, a Broadway musical, getting books into markets that aren't just in the US, getting them sold in the UK, yes, throughout Europe, Asia. And authors also provide publishers also provide authors with, industry recognition. People sit up and take notice when you have a traditional book deal. So, publishers really can provide an enormous amount of benefit to an author. But they also are expecting the author to help them sell the book in a way that publishers rarely did in the past. And that's because things have changed. So publishers assume the financial risk of publication. They're, paying the author in advance when they sign the contract. They will be paying them in royalties, and we'll talk a bit about that in a bit. They cover all of the costs of editing and design and production, printing, distribution, marketing, and publicity. And in return for that, they make money on the book if it sells, and they will have a plan in place for how they're going to sell a book. That might include things like an author tour or an expensive advertising and promotion campaigns, or even, high-end manufacturing. What does that mean? That means, books that maybe are, full color throughout or have, printed edges or bookmarks. Different publishing genres have different expectations for how a book is produced. And those high-end manufacturing expectations can sometimes, help move a title, help sell a title. But those additional expenses, the author tour, the advertising budget, and the high-end manufacturing, those are really at the publisher's discretion. And those choices sometimes change during the production cycle of a book. So a contract may have been signed with promises, verbal promises, not promises written in the contract, but verbal promises of a certain amount of investment in advertising and promotion and production value. But as that book moves through production and other books are being published, the publisher may determine, oh, that book isn't worth the investment that we initially thought, and they can pull back on some of those budgets. Or the opposite can happen. Your book can, because of its timing, because of things that are happening in current events, your book may all of a sudden become very critical and important to their list, and they might throw more money at that. But that's very much at the publisher's discretion. So this is Publisher's Lunch, which is an industry publication, a daily publication. And they sort of define, they identify all of the different book deals. So contracts, books that have gone into contracts with publishers that have happened over the recent past. And you can see their definition of these different deals, a nice deal, just under 50,000, a good deal in the low hundreds, a major deal, 500,000 and up. So these are the numbers that we're talking about when we're talking about publishing deals with a major, one of the big five or big 10, excuse me, publishers. And as I've explained, publishers are assuming a lot of financial exposure by paying the author, covering all the production and manufacturing costs. And therefore, they're very selective. And it turns out that only about 2.5% of submitted manuscripts are contracted by publishers. And that's a number that we should all sit with, because if you think about it, that 2.5% of manuscripts that are submitted to traditional publishers, that does not include the manuscripts that had to go to the agents first. So there are, various levels of gatekeeping. Most traditional publishers, the big five or their contemporaries, will not accept a manuscript. It has to go through another channel, like an agent. So you're really getting into some pretty rarefied numbers here, and it's probably harder to get a book accepted by a traditional publisher than it is to get into Harvard. So that's something to think about. And another thing to think about is that this data point, which I think we should sit with for a minute. So there were 2.6 million books sold in 2020, and 0.01%, or 268 of them, sold more than 100,000 copies. So a few things about this data point. Number one, 100,000 copies is a very nice number to have sold. So let's unpack this. Of this 2.6 million, 500,000 of those books were traditionally published, meaning that 2.1 million were independently published. And So that 2.1 million is obviously going to impact the average number of sales. So that's one thing to think about. But a recent BookScan analysis found that 34% of titles from the top 10 US publishers were selling more than 1,000 copies a year. So that is that's a data point that I think is actually more illustrative. So 34% of titles from the top 10 publishers, so these are traditionally published books, were selling more than 1,000 copies, meaning that, 66% sold less than 1,000 copies. And I've seen other data that suggest that 66%, many of them sold less than 300 copies a year. So this is one of the ways that publishing has changed. When I first started working in-house in the 90s, any reputable publisher could expect to sell, 1,000 copies of pretty much any book that they published. There were a significant number of libraries, either academic or lending libraries, that would, buy pretty much anything that came out of a reputable publisher's catalog. Bookstores would stock up. It was that was just the expectation. There weren't as many books being produced at that time, so that also impacted the sort of the market need for books. But to understand that now we're looking at a world in which the majority of traditionally published books are not selling 1,000 units is, definitely a change in the landscape. So that it really puts pressure on publishers because they are having a financial investment in every single title that they sign a contract for. And if the majority of those books are not selling, they are constantly trying to find books that will sell. Obviously, that's the business that they're in because publishing is a business. So publishers then put pressure on authors to help them sell the books. And they are increasingly expecting that authors will drive audience, visibility, and demand. And they can, when they're considering your manuscript, they will ask you questions about your platform and your mailing list and some other things that we'll be talking about in a minute. I recently sat in on a conversation with Neil Millay, who's an acquiring editor at Workman. And he said it's important to understand that an editor who is reviewing a proposal will look at the author platform immediately. He said within seconds of looking at a proposal, he will go online, Google that person's name, and see where they come up. But he also said that acquisitions, the metrics or the formula for acquisitions is a tripod. And he said that one leg is author platform, one leg is editorial quality, and one leg is baked in sales. He said if you have two strong legs, that a book will get signed. With one strong leg, let's say editorial quality, an amazing book, it's less likely that it'll get signed if it does not have either good author platform reach or baked in sales. So what is a platform? We hear this often that, publishers are looking for platform. Well, a platform is made up of three kinds of engagement: owned, earned, and rented. Owned are things like your newsletter, your website, um, any sort of regular speaking engagements you have, communities that you belong to. These are people who you can activate. That if you tell them, hey, I've written a book and it's getting published and it's for sale, some segment of that group will likely purchase your book, tell friends about your book. That's your owned community. Your earned is getting, um, reviews, having a press, articles written about you, doing podcast appearances, any kind of awards. And that is it it's earned because there's no guarantee that you're going to win those awards, get those podcast appearances, get reviewed, but you have to put it out there in order to get any of these things. They typically don't come running to you. You really have to engage. You have to earn this sort of media coverage. And then rented is social media. And the thing about rented is I think we've all learned a lot about social media. There was a time, maybe 10 years ago, when publishers were snapping up authors who had 100,000 followers on Twitter or Instagram. And what they learned is those social media followers do not necessarily become book buyers. It's a different kind of audience. It's a different kind of engagement. Also, we've all learned with things like the change from Twitter to X that people who are influencers can have amazing followings on these social media platforms, but then something can happen. The platform itself can change, the politics can change, and that audience gets dispersed, and the influencer has no access to them because that influencer never had their email address or their phone number to text them. They just were meeting on this rented, platform, which was Twitter or is Instagram or BookTok. So social media is amazing, but it's important to drive those social media people to your website and to your newsletters so that you can begin to gather their information and own them as opposed to renting them. So, what does this actually look like? This looks like publishers asking about, your email list. And, it doesn't need to be hundreds of thousands of people in your mailing list. A small, engaged mailing list is much better than a large, disengaged one. Your audience. Can you define your audience, and can you explain to a publisher how you engage with your audience? If you're a thought leader and you regularly give talks to people who would be your book audience, bingo, check. That's what they're looking for. And interest in your subject matter and interest in you. Can you can you show a publisher that you can make interest, that you can bring people who are interested to you and your topic? So if this is interesting to you, I have a summer program that's starting next week, and you can follow this QR code and find out more about it. But we are going to be working through some of these topics like platform and identifying, publishers and agents and things like that. So if that's of interest, please check that out. I'd love to see some of you there. And I'm wondering if there are any any questions in the chat, James, or should
Not
I
as of
just
yet,
keep
no.
going? Yeah. Okay. So, please do feel free to put some questions in the chat, people. I'm here at your disposal. All right. So the economics of publishing. I'm going to give you some definitions of some terms that I know are kind of bandied about, and I just don't think that everyone is entirely clear on what any of these things mean. So, book royalty is the amount of money that a publisher pays an author in exchange for the rights to publish the book. And royalties are calculated as a percentage of the book price. So it's either the list price, which is what the book is supposed to sell for, or the net, which would be, how much money the publisher has made on the book. It's all of this is defined in the contract, and how the royalties are calculated is definitely something that will be negotiated in a contract. If any of you are lucky enough to get a book deal, I would urge you to invest in a lawyer who understands intellectual property and publishing. It is probably one of the best investments that you could make because there are a lot of devils in the details. Then there's the author advance. That's the money that you get as an author when you sign the contract. And so it's paid before the book is published. Then there's the author advance earnout. And what that is you basically have to earn your advance. And until you earn your advance, you don't start getting royalty payments. So let's give you an example. If the author receives a $30,000 advance, which is a very reasonable advance, and is earning 15% on the hardcover list, let's say, and the book sells for $20, the author is going to receive $3 for every book that's sold. So 10,000 books need to be sold in order for the author to earn out the advance. If the book is selling 2,000 books a year, it's going to take 5 years for the author to earn out the advance. So that means during those 5 years, the author will receive a royalty statement every year or every 6 months from the publisher, and it will show the balance of the author advance, how much the book has earned out so far, and what remains. And until that remainder hits zero, the author won't start receiving checks on their royalties. But in year 6, if the book continued to sell 2,000 books a year, then the author would start receiving royalty checks. But it's not the author who receives the royalty checks. The agent will receive the checks, and the agent typically will receive 15% of the earnings. And so the checks go to the agent pays themselves, and then they pay the author the balance that is due. But again, all of this happens once that author advance has been earned out. So this would be year 6, they get a check for $6,000. The agent takes 15% of that, and then the remaining 85% go to the author. So, I don't want this to be doom and gloom, because there are a few things that can be true at the same time. Number one, it's hard to get a book published traditionally, but you're never going to get a book published traditionally if you don't try to get a book published traditionally. You got to be in it to win it. So I certainly do not want to say, oh, don't bother. It can be an amazing experience, but it's also not the only experience. We live in an age where there's so many opportunities as an author, if you want your book to get out there and to find an audience, there are so many ways for you to do that. And here's just a little breakdown of some of the ways that you can get a book published. There's traditional, there's hybrid, crowdfunded, and self. So we've talked a lot about traditional already. You have to go through a literary agent for nearly all of the larger traditional publishers. Or if you have a contact in-house, if you know an editor or somebody else, you may be able to bypass that. But there are a number of gatekeepers in a traditional publishing arrangement. You negotiate your contract. They do everything. They produce the book, they do the marketing and promotion. You, as an author, make a small amount of what the publisher makes, but on the other hand, the publisher has invested heavily, and you haven't really had to pay anything. But that also means that there are perhaps decisions that are made by the publisher that you're not being engaged with, that you sort of have to live with. Then there's hybrid publishing. Hybrid publishing is sort of a 50-50 between traditional and self-publishing. There is editorial evaluation and acquisition, so a hybrid publisher isn't going to just take any manuscript. They have to feel that the manuscript is a good fit for their list. They have to feel like it's a quality product. So there still is a certain amount of gatekeeping. You negotiate a contract, but you, as the author, will be asked to pay for aspects of production, things that a traditional publisher would do and not charge you for. A hybrid publisher might, especially if you want things that they consider are beyond, like certain kinds of marketing and publicity, or if it's a nonfiction book and you want a specific kind of index that might be more expensive, like a keyword, not only a keyword index, but also a name and place index, then they might ask you to pay for that because they think it's excessive, or, production value. If you want gold foil on your book cover, they would probably say, well, do that, but it's going to cost you X, Y, or Z. But you get an apparatus, you get a machine that has, connections. Often hybrid publishers are populated by people who've worked in traditional publishing and have moved to hybrid. They have connections. It might be easier to get placement on a local talk show or get your book reviewed because of those connections. Then you have crowdfunding. Crowdfunding is something like a Kickstarter, where you're pitching an audience to invest in your book. And if you make the amount of money that you request, then you receive those funds and you can use them to produce your book. The crowdfunding is a great way, to judge the market for a book. And traditional publishers really do look at crowdfunded books. That's part of that audience tripod that we talked about earlier. If you successfully have crowdfunded a book and then you want to seek traditional publishing, they are very open to that because you have demonstrated that you have an audience that's engaged with your book and is willing to put money down. But crowdfunding can be time consuming and expensive to produce the video and the assets that you need to show on the crowdfunding website to excite people and get them excited about your book and wanting to pay for your book. So that's one of the things to keep in mind, that it is a bit of an investment. And then there's self-publishing. Self-publishing, there are no gatekeepers. You are producing your book yourself, so you are the final authority. You are paying for everything yourself, so the investment can be great. If you produce it with the assistance of people and businesses that know what they're doing, you can absolutely create a book that is uh, exactly like a traditionally published book would be edited, all of those things manufactured. So you don't have to feel that it's less than, but uh, it's a question of investment in terms of your time and your money, definitely. I'm wondering if there's any questions.
Hi, Linda. Yeah, actually, Julie, I mean, literally like a minute before you talked about publishing paths, had asked,
Mhm.
I'll just read it. If publishers are expecting so much from authors regarding marketing, etc., are prospective authors better off using hybrid or self-publishing models? I know you just kind of covered that, but if you have anything you want to add to that specific question, perhaps.
Yeah. I do think it's a very personal decision, what you want to explore. Sometimes I have author clients who come to me because I do develop books for indie authors, and they will have decided that they want to take on the investment themselves because of speed to market. They know that if they go through the traditional path. It's going to take, 6 months, 12 months before they get to contract. And then it's probably going to take another 12 months, maybe 18 months before the book gets to market because it has to go through the publishing company and their already existing schedules. And, if their work is timely, they feel like, oh, I'm not waiting 3 years for this book to be out. If I do it myself, I have more control and I can get it out as quickly as I need. Um, but other authors really would love the like imprimatur of a traditional publishing house having signed them, and that is very important to them. um, some of my clients really want traditional publishing, but I always ask them to have a backup plan. What are you going to do if that traditional arrangement doesn't happen? If you don't get offered a contract, are you going to just put the manuscript in your bottom drawer and forget about it? Or are you going to pursue hybrid or self-publishing? And to sort of have that backup plan in mind when you start off, I think is useful. I'm a gal who likes a backup plan, so maybe it's just me, but I think it's important to understand why you want to publish your book, and if those success criteria can accommodate self-publishing as well as traditional publishing, or is it only one of those options? And we'll have some time in a bit to chat more, so I'd be super happy to talk more, Julie. I hope that kind of started the answer to your question. So the thing that I want to express to all of you is that, these publishing paths are not silos. They very much can converge and overlap. It is not uncommon for a book to have been self-published, achieve a good amount of success and visibility, and then be picked up by a traditional publisher. But I also have clients who have done the reverse. They have been traditionally published. Some of them, a number of their books have been traditionally published, but they want to self publish now because they want the control, or they know that they have a direct line to their audience. And so they don't need the publisher's sales apparatus, distribution apparatus, because they have that direct line to their readers, and frankly, they can just make more money selling directly to their readers. So every book has its own um, calculations that need to be evaluated by the author to kind of understand right now what is the best option, that option might not be the best option in 2 or 3 years, and that's fine because this is a process of evolution. Technology changes, the discourse changes, and it's important to always be looking at your titles and where they are, how they're positioned, and assuring yourself that it still makes sense, that those decisions that were made 6 months ago, a year ago, are still relevant now. So I thought it would be useful to sort of like end this conversation with, just a good list of who I think is best served by traditional publishing. So anyone who's in the academic market that believes their book would benefit, would do well in a library or institutional marketplace. Those are very rarefied distribution channels, and traditional publishers really just they have they have the respect of those audiences. They know, they go to the conferences, they have the catalogs, they are already in their distribution systems, so it's much easier for a traditional publisher to sell to an academic library or institutional market. An author who wants bookstore placement. An indie author can absolutely get bookstore placement, but there is a significant amount of financial risk associated with that. And that has to do with the particulars of how books are sold in bookstores. And I will try to be rather brief about this, but trust me, it's a lot deeper. But essentially, books need to be discounted for bookstores to purchase them. So a typical discount is, 50%. So number one, you're discounting your book 50%. The second big thing is you are accepting returns. And this is where the jeopardy comes in. So what that means is if a bookstore buys 5 of your book and they sell 2, and after 6 months they still have the other 3, and they want that, shelf space for, Christmas books, let's say, they can send those 3 books back to your distributor. And so that would most likely be Ingram Spark. And that distributor will then charge you for those books. You will have gotten paid for those books, but then the distributor will say, hey, those books have come back. You need to pay us. You need to pay us what we paid you. You need to pay us the difference between what we paid you and what the bookstore paid us, the 50% discounted price, and the shipping. So you can imagine if you had 300 books that went out and 200 books came back, you're starting to talk about a significant amount of money that you could be at risk for. So that's why a traditional publisher is better set up. They have the same rules. They still have to do 50% discount. They still have to accept returns. But because they're a high volume business, they're accepting returns, but they're also shipping books out. It kind of washes out a little bit. It's just the exposure is so much different if you have a lot of books than if you have 1 or 2 titles and you're, kind of waiting for those shoes to drop. And books can get returned, 2 years later. So you're really never sure when those books have actually sold. So bookstore placement is an issue. We've already talked about prestige, third-party validation. If that is incredibly important, then obviously you need to, then probably a traditional publisher is a good bet for you. Broad commercial potential, uh, you'll probably have an easier time with a traditional publisher because they're going to take care of everything and get your book sold. Um, Subsidiary rights. So that is, foreign language rights, movie rights, music rights, TV rights. If your book has that potential, it's beneficial to have a publisher and an agent who can negotiate those terms for you, who are working with companies that they work with all the time and have a rapport with. And also authors who just don't want to manage the publishing business. It is, it's a full-time job to self-publish. And, most of us self-published on the side. So it can be a lot. But those are the criteria. I think if you fall into one of those six, then I would explore traditional publishing, definitely. And that's it for the slides. And I would love to chat. I think I saw another question come up. Hi, Julie.
Hi. I am wondering, I had to step out to accept a package delivery.
Okay,
And
sure.
when you were talking about that books can be returned and then the author's gotta pay the difference, was which format was that? Was that self-publishing that you were talking about, or can that happen in traditional publishing or hybrid or any of them?
Yeah. So books books being sold to bookstores can always be returned. That's how bookstores work. But in traditional publishing and in hybrid publishing, the publisher is taking that exposure. That's how they do business. That is part of uh, you know, their budgeting even includes returns. Uh, I'm saying the exposure is most risky though for an indie author. I'm publishing a book that my dad wrote in the 50s. I've reissued it. It published on Tuesday. I'll give a little in case anyone's interested. It's called Coins in the Fountain. It was made into a movie in the 50s called Three Coins in the Fountain. There's a Frank Sinatra song. It's been out of print my entire life, and I reissued it last Tuesday. So uh, I have decided that I want to see if it'll sell in bookstores, but I am watching that like a hawk. I mean, every morning I open up my Ingram Spark back end to see how many bookstores have purchased it. And I'll tell you, it's not in the hundreds even. I think I've had 3 bookstores purchase my book. So right now the risk is tolerable. But I have heard stories of, from authors who had this experience where, for whatever reason, their book caught the eye of Target, and Target bought 10,000 units and then returned 5,000 units. That is like bankruptcy level money there. So, but that doesn't happen out of the blue. Like Target doesn't just order 10,000 books. If Target wants your book, they are going to talk to you. They're going to want a special cover. They're going to, there's a whole system, merchandising system that goes along with that. So I don't mean to scare you like, oh my God, my book's going to be, printed by Target. That's not how it works. But you can understand the author was so excited. 10,000, you want to buy 10,000 of my book? Of course, like take my book, but did not understand the repercussions of accepting returns. I don't know how he was guided through that, and it's really like one of the publishing professionals should have explained this to him, because it is a challenge. But I think for most indie authors, if you want to step your toe in the bookstore world, there are a few things you can do. One, you can accept returns and do a 50% discount. That signals to bookstores that you're open to trade sales. The other is contacting individual bookstores and selling on consignment. So offering, saying, I'll send you 2 books. If you sell them, give me 50%. If you don't, you can ship them back to me in 6 months or whatever. And you'll control that. And often what happens, I think, is, I know bookstores talk to each other. So if you were selling on consignment and they were doing well with it, they would probably tell a few of their friends in other bookstores, and you might begin to get a bigger audience that way. And at some point, then you might decide, okay, I am going to go the returns route because I have so many bookstores now that are interested in me that it's worth it. or not. Consignment is absolutely, I'm actually doing consignment at some local bookstores for coins. Um, and the reason I agreed to do that was I was like, okay, then I'm minimizing my risk at those bookstores at least. I don't have to worry about it. So it feels like playing both sides. We'll see which is better. Did that answer your question, Julie?
Thank you.
You're welcome. Are there any other questions? Nope.
Not that I'm
Oh,
seeing in the chat, no. Oh, can we
okay.
just get one more?
Oh,
Emily said that she was having some audio issues, but that this has been wonderful.
thank
And
you.
we've got a question from Rianne. Are you able to see it, Linda?
No, I was gonna share my screen again for something. So can you just tell me what it says?
Yeah, it's kind of long. I'll read it. It's
Okay.
just kind of a thorough question. Rianne says, "This is an involved question. I
Okay.
have a
Let me
very
see.
popular Christian author I worked with until her death in 2023, with her own testimonial books tied in with another popular author very well known all over the world. They worked with John and Elizabeth Sherrill, who founded Harvest House Chosen Books, until her
Mhm,
contract ran out and she resumed control over her own book that fell into this person's care after her death. Um,
mhm,
Rianne says, recently, her family, was offered a 7-year publication contract right in the middle of putting uh, her audiobook with her actual voice that she was about to publish on her own. Since her
mhm,
death, the demand for any copies she has on hand has gone up. So,
mhm,
since she has the entire book ready to go for audio and print, and the demand is already there, she's thinking about
mhm,
self-publishing. And
mhm,
also Chosen has offered to republish. However,
mhm.
the other offer she just got seems pretty good, and he was very enthusiastic for the quality of the story, so she's facing a decision.
Mm, yeah. I would be loath to give you any advice without having a lot more information, but it is a good problem. I mean, it feels like you could go a number of ways. I think if you're talking about an estate, it might be easier and cleaner to go with a traditional publisher just because you're going to have royalty statements and less kind of investment on the side of the estate. The publisher will take care of everything. That just feels like a cleaner a cleaner way to go. Self-publishing, like I said, is sort of a full-time job and might be too much. But that's just my 2 cents. Um, did you say that royalties on a 20 book? Royalties in general, regardless of as to the price of the book, are around 15%. Again, that's something that you will negotiate in a book contract. That's with a traditional author. Um, but between 10 and 15% is pretty standard. I think publishers will give you a higher royalty rate. I think it's closer to 30%. But again, that's something that's negotiated in the contract. Julie, did you raise your hand again?
Yes, thank you.
Mhm.
I don't know if maybe I missed the answer to my question in the chat earlier when I had to sign for that package. How much would an author expect to pay if trying to self-publish then?
Well,
Uh,
that really depends on the kind of book and the length and who you're working with, quite frankly. I think it's hard for me to guess, but I'm going to say for like a book of 220, like a work of fiction, 220 pages, you could probably pay as little as $1,500 or as much as $10,000,
okay.
maybe even more. It depends on and you get what you pay for. I'm gonna being on
Okay.
the higher end of that scale, I will tell you, you absolutely get what you pay for. Um,
Well, that's
okay.
helpful. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Also regarding that, are there reputable then, um, book production companies that, how does a self-published author know who to go to get the book actually created, the physical book?
Yeah, I mean there are tons of reputable companies, and then there are also, snake oil salesmen. So
That's part of why
buyer
I ask.
beware, buyer beware. I would be happy to follow up with you to talk to you about my services. And if I'm not a good fit, then I could introduce you to some other opportunities. You can go to Jane Friedman. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Jane Friedman, but she is like the expert on self-publishing in the United States. And she has a list of trusted suppliers. I'm proud to say I'm on that list. So, word of mouth is a good way, going to reputable people and getting suggestions from them. That's how I would recommend you guys proceed. But Julie, we'll have a follow-up to this session, and you can reach out to me, and I'd be happy to talk to you for a half an hour about what your book is. And
Oh, that's very sweet. Thank you.
yeah, yes, no problem.
And
So,
Julie, I'm just coming off of my second cohort group with Linda, and I have to say there's a lot of being a part of the cohort group. There are always lots of resources that are shared. Well, Linda's wonderful about putting those in our group canvas. So there's that too. Just
oh, thank you,
All right.
Stan. It's
Thank
very
you.
nice. So if anyone here is interested in learning more and participating, working with me this summer, I am doing a summer sprint series. It's a series of sort of 2-week intensives over the course of the summer. So you're not working the whole summer, you're just working these 2-week intensives. And if you need to miss one, it's absolutely fine. And it's very much choose your own adventure. So if you want to be writing, you can be writing. If you want to look at, sales platforms and really understand bookstore sales and how to get the most of them, anything you want, I'm here to assist you. But it is accountability with a community, and then you get access to the platform that Stan was just talking about that has lots of resources on it as well. So you guys can find out more by following this QR code. We'll also have some information in the follow-up email. And then in the fall, my next program that Stan is just graduated from is starting, and that's a 3-month coaching program. It's a group coaching program, and there we really go through from soup to nuts, publishing, traditional publishing and indie publishing, and really set you up to understand the positioning for your book and what's best for your book in terms of next steps and metadata, discoverability, just all the things. So I hope that some of you will consider one or both of those, and I would love to see you all again. So thank you so much for joining me today. If we don't have any questions, I'll end, but I'm happy to answer any more questions if anyone's got any more questions. No? Okay. Well, thank you so much, everybody. We will follow up, and it's been great seeing you all. Bye.